You sit down to meditate, and immediately you feel that you're doing it all wrong. Tension creeps into your shoulders. Restlessness ripples through your body. And then comes that quiet judgment, that inner voice whispering, you're doing this wrong. You should be calmer, more present, more something. And here's the curious paradox Alan Watts invites us to explore. Meditation's whole point is to relax. So why does trying to relax create even more tension? The more you strive to empty your mind, the more thoughts arise. The more you attempt to reach inner peace, the more agitated you become. It's as if the very act of trying is sabotaging what you seek. Alan Watts dedicated his life to unraveling this psychological enigma, and what he discovered can completely transform the way you understand not just meditation, but the very nature of human effort itself. Because the truth he revealed is as simple as it is startling. Trying is meditation's worst enemy. Let us understand this together. Watts often drew on the ancient Chinese philosophy of Wu Wei, effortless action or non-doing. But don't be fooled, it's not passivity. It's something far more subtle, far more profound. Think of water flowing through a river. Water doesn't try to flow. It simply flows. It finds the path of least resistance, goes around the stones, descends the hills, without ever forcing, without ever struggling against its own nature. Or observe a tree growing. The tree doesn't try to grow. There is no effort, no tension in the roots trying to expand, or in the branches trying to reach the sky. Growth happens naturally, as an expression of life itself unfolding. And here is the revelation that changed everything for those who truly understood Watts. You cannot force yourself to be relaxed. Think about that for a moment. Really think. You cannot tense your body and mind to achieve a state of relaxation. It's a fundamental contradiction, a logical impossibility. It's like trying to fall asleep by forcing yourself to sleep. The more you try, the more awake you remain. The paradox becomes crystal clear. The you that wants to meditate, that wants to achieve enlightenment, that wants to master this practice, that's precisely the part of you preventing meditation from happening. Because that you is the ego, and the ego is built upon effort, upon achievement, upon the constant quest to become something better, something more complete, something more spiritual. The ego sits down to meditate like a general surveying territory to conquer. It wants to achieve, wants to accomplish, wants to nail the experience of meditating correctly. It wants to add person who meditates well to its resume of identities. But meditation, in Watts' understanding, is not about conquest. It's about dissolution. It's not about becoming someone better. It's about realizing that you never were that separate person, that isolated ego, trying to reach something outside of itself. And here the paradox deepens even further, like concentric waves expanding across the surface of a tranquil lake. Trying to sleep keeps you awake. Trying to be spontaneous reveals how much you are being controlled. Trying to feel confident reveals exactly the doubt you're trying to hide. Do you see the pattern? The very act of trying to achieve a state creates the distance between you and that state. Effort is the gap. The attempt is the separation. Imagine trying to catch your own hand. You can move one hand toward the other, but there will always be two hands. There will always be that which grasps and that which is grasped. There will never be a collapse of this duality while you are trying. Similarly, while there is a you trying to meditate, there is always this division, the meditator and meditation, the observer and the observed, the seeker and that which is sought. Watts perceived this with a clarity that few have achieved. He saw people sitting in lotus posture, concentrating intensely on not concentrating, striving tremendously to not strive, creating layer upon layer of tension in the name of the pursuit of relaxation. And the most fascinating part of this enigma, the part of you that wants to meditate, is exactly the part that stands in the way of meditation. The ego wants enlightenment the way it wants a new car, a promotion at work, the approval of others. It's just another item on the list of achievements, another way to feel superior, another identity to add to the collection. I'm someone who meditates. I am spiritual. I am on the path. But authentic meditation, the kind Watts pointed toward, is the dissolution of this very mechanism of seeking. It is the end of the ego as conqueror. It is the death of that separate entity that is always trying to become something it is not yet. And this brings us to a disturbing question, an issue that cannot be answered by logical thought, but that must be felt, experienced. If trying prevents meditation, and if the meditator is the obstacle, then what happens when you stop trying? It is not passivity. It is not giving up. It is not sinking into lethargy or mental laziness. It is something completely different. A quality of attention that does not force, that does not control, that does not attempt to direct experience towards some specific place. It is awareness that observes thoughts without being swept away by them. It is the presence that witnesses restlessness without struggling against it. It is the perception that notices tension without creating more tension in the attempt to eliminate it. Watts called this letting it happen, not as abandonment but as permission, like a tree allowing growth or water allowing itself to flow. But here is the question that haunts us, the question that won't settle. How do you stop trying when your mind has been trained your whole life to try? How do you access this quality of non-effort when the very you is built upon effort? How do you let it happen when letting it happen seems to be just another thing you need to do, another technique you need to master, another way of trying? And this is where the journey truly begins. Understanding the paradox intellectually is only the first step. Feeling it, living it, allowing it to dissolve the rigid patterns of the ego, that is something entirely different. Alan Watts left us at the doorway of this perception. He pointed at the moon, as the Buddhists say, but do not confuse the finger with the moon itself. The paradox is clear. You cannot try not to try. You cannot make an effort to not strive. You cannot use the ego to transcend the ego. So what remains? What happens in the space between the intellectual understanding of this paradox and the direct living of it? What reveals itself when you really stop and feel, not think, but feel the weight of this fundamental contradiction at the center of human experience? That is the door Alan Watts opened. And what is on the other side cannot be said, only experienced. But perhaps we can get closer. Perhaps we can explore what happens when you shift your relationship with trying itself, when you begin to see effort not as the path, but as the obstacle. Perhaps there is a form of attention that is not control, a form of presence that is not achievement, a form of being that does not require becoming. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is exactly what meditation has always been, hidden beneath layers of techniques, methods, and well-intentioned efforts. The question hangs suspended in the air, like an invitation. How do you not try when your mind has been trained to always try? So what does not trying mean? Would it just be giving up and sitting waiting for something to happen? Would it be empty passivity, a surrender without purpose? No, Watts shows us something much deeper. Not trying does not mean abandoning movement. It means releasing the quality of effort, the tension, the internal struggle that transforms every moment into a battle against yourself. It is like the difference between forcing a locked door open and realizing the door was never truly locked. And this is where the Eastern wisdom that Watts studied so much offers us a framework for understanding this shift. The ancient Taoists had a concept called Wu Wei. The literal translation is non-action, but this completely confuses the meaning. Wu Wei is not about inertia. It is about action without effort, movement without struggle, flow without resistance. Think of the best martial artists. They do not plan each movement rigidly. They flow, the body responds before the conscious mind can interfere. When you watch a master of Aikido or Kung Fu, you do not see tension. You see water moving around stones. There is intense action, but without the quality of struggle. Or watch an athlete in the zone, that state of peak performance. The basketball player who can't miss a shot. The tennis player who seems to read their opponent's mind. What do they all say afterward? I wasn't thinking. It was just happening. No self-consciousness, no I trying to make it happen. Just the shot, the serve, pure movement. Musicians know this intimately. The best ones aren't tracking every note while they play. They're possessed by the music. Their hands move as if they have a mind of their own. The melody flows through them, not from them. When a pianist tries too hard, becomes hyper-aware of every finger and beat, the music dies. It becomes mechanical, robotic, lifeless. So what is happening here? Why does trying sabotage performance? Modern neuroscience is beginning to understand something the Taoists knew millennia ago. When you become self-conscious, when there is a self constantly observing and judging, you create tension in your nervous system. Your brain splits its attention between doing and watching itself do, between being and evaluating whether it is being correctly. This internal division is exhausting. It's like driving with the parking brake on. Technically you're moving, but there's constant resistance, friction, wasted energy. But when you observe without judgment, when you allow the natural intelligence of your body and mind to emerge without interference from the ego, something extraordinary happens. You become more efficient, more intuitive, more present. Here is the insight that changes everything. The more you try to relax, the more your nervous system registers threat. Because trying to relax presupposes that something is wrong, something that needs to be fixed, something you are not doing right. And that activates exactly the stress mechanism you are trying to switch off. It is neurologically impossible to force relaxation. It is like trying to fall asleep on command. The harder you try, the more awake you stay. And this brings us to the heart of the paradox, to the place where most of us get completely stuck, because it is not just about meditation. It is about who you think you are. The self trying to meditate, the self wanting peace, the self seeking enlightenment. That self is exactly the problem. Not because you're bad or wrong, but because that separate self, that ego feeling disconnected from everything, is fundamentally an illusion. And meditation, when done correctly, reveals that illusion. Watts spent decades studying Zen Buddhism, Hindu Vedanta, Taoism, and they all point to the same radical truth. The separate self you think you are, that lonely observer inside your head looking out at the world, doesn't exist the way you think it does. It's a mental construct, a thought habit, a story you keep telling yourself. And here's the impossible twist. Meditation can't be done by that separate self, because that self is the obstacle. It's what's creating the tension, the division, the struggle. That's why so many of us feel lost. You sit down to meditate, and there's this sense of, I am meditating. There's a subject and an activity. There's someone trying to achieve something. And as long as that structure is in place, true meditation can't happen. Because you're maintaining exactly the division that meditation must dissolve. Watts puts it perfectly. You can't grasp your hand with the same hand. You can't bite your own teeth. And you can't use the ego to transcend the ego. But then, if the ego isn't what meditates, what does? Who's here? Watts' answer is radical. You already are what you're trying to become. You're not seeking something missing. You're trying to remember something you never lost. You're trying to reach where you already are. The peace you seek isn't somewhere in the future, after you've meditated enough, after you finally make it. Peace is already here. It always has been. You're made of it. It's your original nature. Hidden beneath the layers of trying, effort, struggle, you don't attain mindfulness. You release compulsive unconsciousness. You don't achieve enlightenment. You stop resisting what's already illuminated. You don't conquer peace. You allow it to be what it always was. And that validates something profound that many of us have felt, but never knew how to name. The reason you struggle so much isn't because you're doing it wrong. It's because the struggle itself is the problem. The attempt to fix is what keeps the sense of brokenness. That's the breakthrough moment. That's the moment everything clicks. You're not broken needing to be fixed. You're whole pretending to be broken. And when that understanding hits, even for a second, everything changes. Not because you become different, but because you stop running from what already is. So what happens when you let go? When you release the trying, the effort, the self that's always monitoring itself, space opens. Silence emerges. Not the dead silence of absence, but the living silence of pure presence. And what fills that space? It's not emptiness, as the ego fears. It's the natural peace that was always here. It's the original consciousness you never stopped being. It's the stillness that sustains all movement, the background that allows every image to appear. But that's terrifying to the ego. Because if you're not the separate self, if you're the vast open consciousness instead of the small defensive observer, then the ego loses its narrative of control. It loses the story it tells about being in charge, about having to protect you, about being at the center of everything. And that's a death. Not physical, but existential. A death of the sense of separation. And every death is scary, even when it's the death of an illusion. And see how that paradox expands beyond meditation. It's in your whole life. You try to be confident, and that very attempt creates self-consciousness. You become hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, every micro-expression. And the more you try to seem confident, the more insecure you feel. Because real confidence doesn't come from trying. It flows when you forget to monitor yourself. You try to be happy, and soon anxiety arises about not being happy enough. You start measuring your happiness, comparing with others, wondering if you're doing it right. And that very thing kills spontaneous happiness. Because happiness isn't something you conquer. It's something that happens when you stop chasing it. You try to be spiritual, and what Buddhists call spiritual materialism emerges. You collect practices, rack up insights, build an identity as a spiritual person. And that's just the ego in new clothes. It's the separate self trying to become special through spirituality. Same struggle, different packaging. So meditation seen correctly is no longer a task, no longer something for your to-do list. It becomes permission. Permission to stop struggling. Permission to release the constant effort to become something different from what you are. Permission to finally rest in what's already here. So the invitation isn't what you thought. It's not meditate more, try harder, find the right technique. The invitation is stop trying to save yourself. Stop fighting yourself. Allow the peace you already are to surface naturally, without effort, without struggle. But what happens then? What really unfolds when you stop struggling? When the trying finally ceases and you surrender to what's already here? Let's explore what emerges when you finally allow transformation to happen. Then the real question that remains is, what really changes when you understand this? When you finally grasp that meditation is not a technique to achieve peace, but rather a permission to stop struggling against yourself. Remember that moment I mentioned at the start? You sitting there, frustrated, thinking, I can't meditate. My mind won't shut up. That feeling you labeled failure was actually the deepest insight possible. You were seeing with absolute clarity what Alan Watts was trying to show you. The mind isn't something to control, it's something to observe. The transformation isn't in mastering a technique. It's in understanding what you really are beneath all this attempted control. Because look, there is a visceral experience that happens when you finally let go of control. It's a relief so profound you didn't know it was possible. You realize you were holding your own breath, metaphorically speaking, and suddenly you remember that you can simply breathe. Imagine a flower spending its whole life forcing itself to bloom, straining, trying, demanding its petals open through sheer willpower. And then, in one moment, it stops. In that cessation of effort, the petals open by themselves. Not because it forced them, but because it's the flower's nature to bloom when it's not fighting itself. This is the paradox in action. It's not theory. It's the real sensation of when effort ceases and presence simply flows. When you realize that what you were trying to achieve, peace, clarity, silence, was already there. You were just blocking it with all this striving. Alan Watts called this original mind, the mind already present that doesn't need to be reached. The consciousness observing your thoughts without getting caught up in them. It's not an achievement, it's a recognition. Like opening your eyes and realizing there's always been light, you were just looking the wrong way. And here's what is truly liberating. This paradox doesn't only operate in meditation, it operates throughout your entire life, in your work, in your relationships, in your creativity. Whenever you release the suffocating control of the ego trying to achieve a natural intelligence emerges. Think of how many times you've gotten stuck on a problem, forcing a solution, pushing, striving, demanding the answer appear. And then you give up. You do something else. You take a shower, and suddenly the solution clicks. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped blocking your own intelligence's natural flow. That's Wu Wei, action arising from being, not striving. It's what happens when you trust your original nature instead of forcing it to be something you think it should be. And when you understand this, really get it, not just intellectually but viscerally, in your bones, something shifts. You no longer meditate to achieve peace. You realize peace is what you really are when you stop interrupting it with all this frantic searching. You no longer try to control your mind. You simply observe it naturally, the way you watch clouds passing in the sky. They come, they go. You're not trying to hold them. You're not trying to push them away. You just watch. And meditation itself, it transforms from a project into a permission. Permission to stop all projects. Permission to simply be without the constant demand that you should be different from what you are in this moment. Alan Watts invites you to ask a radical question. What if you trusted your original nature? Think about it. You didn't learn to grow a body. You didn't study manuals on cellular development. You didn't consciously plan your heartbeat or cell renewal. It happened naturally, because that's life's nature. In the same way, you didn't learn to flow as consciousness. You didn't need training to be conscious. Consciousness is already the nature of your own attention. It has always been operating beneath the surface. Meditation doesn't teach you to be conscious. It simply removes the layers of effort that were blocking the consciousness that was already there. It's like cleaning a window. Light doesn't need to be created. It just needs to be allowed. But here's the part requiring courage. The ego fears this, because the ego is the project. The ego is that voice saying, I need to become better. I need to achieve. I need to prove myself. And when you release the effort, when you let your original nature simply be, the ego experiences that as a kind of death. And in a way it is. It's the death of the illusion you need to become something different from what you already are. The death of the idea that peace is somewhere distant, waiting to be conquered. But this death isn't the end. It's a rebirth. It's awakening to the authentic being that's always been there, hidden beneath all these layers of striving and effort. The paradox is this: by letting go of everything, you don't lose anything real. You only lose illusions. And in the absence of those illusions, what remains is what's always been true. You realize meditation isn't something you do. It's something you allow, not a technique you master. An understanding you finally stop resisting. And when resistance ceases, something extraordinary happens. Meditation begins to meditate you. Attention turns on itself naturally, effortlessly. You're no longer trying to observe your thoughts. You simply notice observation is already happening. It's like discovering you were trying to hold the ocean in your hands when all along you were the ocean itself. The wave trying to become water. The effort was ridiculous from the start. So that's Alan Watts' gift. Not a technique, not a method, but a deep understanding that paradox isn't an obstacle, it is the path. The attempt was never the enemy. The resistance to not trying is the enemy. The block isn't effort itself, it's the fear of letting go of effort. The fear that if you stop trying, you'll disappear. But the truth is the opposite. When you stop trying to be something, you finally discover what you really are. And what you are doesn't need effort to exist. It only needs permission to be. Real meditation happens when you stop blocking it. When you stop meditating towards something and simply let meditation meditate you. When you recognize peace isn't a destination, it's what you are when you stop traveling. So I invite you to try an experiment. Not now, not in this video, but at some point when you find yourself alone, in silence. What if you stop trying for just one moment? Just one, no agenda, no objective, no expectation that something should happen. What appears when the attempt ceases? What remains when you are no longer striving to be different? That's the question Alan Watts leaves you with, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. An invitation to recognize you, have permission to let go of what's already failed, permission to stop carrying the weight of becoming something you already are. And perhaps in that moment of ceasing, you notice something surprising. There's nothing to achieve. There never was. There was only a quiet invitation to stop resisting what was always present. Meditation doesn't take you anywhere. It brings you to where you've always been. To the only place you can truly be, here, now, without effort, without striving, just conscious presence observing itself. And in that observation, without attempt, without resistance, space opens. Not because you did something, but because you finally stopped doing everything. That's the paradox. That's the path. And that's the invitation that was always there, waiting for you to stop looking for it. So breathe, let go, and notice that you have already arrived. If you want to explore more of these paradoxes, these insights that shift how you see yourself, subscribe to the channel. Not as another project, but as a reminder that this understanding can unfold differently each time you return to it. Because true practice isn't here, it's now, in your own attention. In the quiet space that opens when you finally let it exist. Sit with this, let it unfold, and notice you don't need to do anything with this understanding. It only needs to be remembered, and in the remembering, something naturally shifts. Not because you tried to change, but because you finally stopped resisting what was always true.